I feel like we should move them to a more prominent place where they'll be captured in the live screen better.
I have them hidden behind my.
There you go.
Okay, we are streaming.
Okay. I will call to order this Thursday, December 11th, 2025 meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission at 6:07 p.m. This is our final meeting of 2025, which is pretty crazy. It's also our final meeting with our planning commissioner, Miles Lofton, who will be abandoning us for the higher skies of elected office as he takes on his role as a newly elected city council member come January. So Miles, we're super sad to see you go, but of course really excited for your next adventure and that you will be representing all of us Moab residents at City Hall.
Yeah.
So we'll say more, I'm sure, by the
Well,
end of
thank you.
in attendance this evening, we have City Staff Johanna Blanco, Kelsey Garcia, Corey Shirtliff, and Alexi Lamb. We have all 5 planning commissioners in attendance. Miles Lofton is here remotely. And then we have a citizen in the audience who an applicant. All right. One of our applicants is here with us in the audience, which I imagine they will introduce themselves when the time comes. Okay. First item of business, citizens to be heard. We did receive something. Citizens to be heard. Nope. I apologize. This was just an email from Planning Development Services. We did not receive anything for citizens to be heard.
Correct.
Okay. And I don't believe we have anyone here for citizens to be heard. Our audience member is here as an applicant for an agenda item this evening. So we will move on to item number 3, approval of minutes. These are minutes from our last meeting on December 1st, our special meeting on December 1st. If anyone has had a chance to read those, any amendments, additions, clarifications.
I noticed 2 little things under the
Yeah.
water shortage response plan section. It mentions that Miles made a motion, but not who seconded or what the overall vote was. But
Oh.
those pieces seem to be missing.
Oh, yep.
And then under the land use code update section, just wanted to double check, Corey, that you were okay with the word inadequate in there of the sentences. Corey explained that the consultants produced an inadequate first draft of the code revision.
Wonderful catch.
Yeah. I don't think that adequately captures
No.
what the discussion was, nor what you said, Corey.
Thank you.
I think that's a good flag, Carolyn. Yes, that water shortage plan did pass. I don't remember who seconded. It may have been Shaylee.
I was pretty sure it was.
Well, but we have a recording.
Yeah.
That can be amended.
Mhm.
Good catches, Carolyn. Yes. If someone would like to make a motion to approve the minutes with those 2 amendments, just make clear what we need to add. We can get those fixed.
What would be the proposed amendment for the language change for the land use code update?
I would just say to clarify the language that
Yeah, the
Development
word
director.
usage will be amended to reflect where module 1 of the consultant's submittal. I'll wordsmith it. I don't want to quite do it live. But it's essentially inadequate is not correct.
Correct.
It may, there may have been elements of the module that were not consistent with where we were going, which if you're just putting that one word, I could see how that could have been through some auto systems
Yeah.
in a synonym. But yeah, if you would give us the liberty of amending that as staff, I think we'll do that.
Okay.
Unless we can come back to this. We can also come back to it and I'll wordsmith it exactly by the end of the meeting, if you'd like that.
Oh,
I think just giving staff leeway to make that correction so it adequately reflects what was said on the record.
Thank you. That's a really great catch.
Yeah.
Because that is, we don't want any way
Mhm.
that sounds much more severe than I think it is
Yeah.
That's
to
why
actually have the
Or that there was some sort of mistake on the part of the
Correct.
consultants, which there certainly weren't.
Okay, well, I can make a motion to approve the minutes with amendments of the Moab City Planning Commission special meeting from December 1st, 2025, adding the details of the vote outcome for the water shortage response plan section and making some amendments to the language under the land use code update section in the second sentence per staff guidance about the initial summary from Community Development Director Shirtliff about the consultants work.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the minutes with a couple amendments from Carolyn. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, a second from Shaylee. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right. Minutes approved with amendments noted. Good catch, Carolyn, on both of those things. I think my eyes skip over some of
Mhm.
that sometimes when I'm reading. All right, next is our first and only action item of the evening, 4.1, a public hearing and consideration and possible recommendation of approval of a development agreement for 57 West Cane Creek Boulevard, parcel 0100010200 between Amasa Holdings LLC and the city of Moab. City staff, take it away.
Okie doke. So today we're looking for a recommendation to City Council on this development agreement. A little context about the parcel we're talking about. The property owner is Amasa Holdings. It's at 57 West Cane Creek. It is in the R3 zone. Our applicant today here is Amanda Dillon, and they are proposing around 88 units. So we started drafting this agreement in August. Right now, the project is working its way through DRT to get their preliminary plan and their preliminary plat up to our standards, and then it'll be seen by you all. And then they're also simultaneously working on their final phase 1 plan and plat. This project has already been awarded funding for phase 1 and phase 2 in the form of low-income housing tax credits. So getting into the meat of the agreement, here are the city concessions. 5-foot decrease in the setbacks, an alteration of the parking calculation to allow 1 parking space per unit. Normally, this would be 1 for single bedroom and 1.5 for all other makeups. They also have a waiver of the usually 33% AEH requirements, and we're exchanging that for the low-income housing tax credit affordability requirements. They also, in the agreement, we've come up with a custom process and plan that more closely mirrors the master plan development process, although it's not exactly the master plan development process. And in return for those concessions, the community will be provided 50 units in phase 1, 38 units in phase 2, and then in phase 3, they have the option of up to 12 condominium units, and you can see the area median income rent restrictions on each of the units in phase 1. And then in phase 2, although they're not listed out by type, they will all be below 50% area median income. I'll give you a moment on this one. Okie doke. So the custom process mentioned in the city concession, this is the preliminary plan and the preliminary plat. That's the general feasibility of the division of the plat, townhome plat, and then also the plan that's going to be seen by you, and that's going to have a public hearing. So that's when the public can really come and give their feedback when we're talking about the whole of the development. Then as the phases come, that'll be approved administratively, so it won't be coming to you guys. The development agreement, so the one that we're looking for a recommendation on today will be for the whole project, and then specifically also for phase 1. And then when phase 2 and phase 3 are sold to different parties, they will also come back for specific phase agreements. This is the conceptual plat. This is pretty similar to the preliminary plat that'll be coming to you guys sometime in January. So I'll go over it just a little bit. We've got phase 1. Here is where a new building will be, and a new building will be here. And this parcel is parking. And then this guy is being rehabbed. And then, so that's phase 1, phase 2. Oh, also a clubhouse over here. Then phase 2 involves rehabbing all the other units that are pictured here, as well as a new building. And then phase 3, the final phase of this project, is going to be filling in these corners. Oh, might have been easier to explain it on this one. This is their conceptual plan, which shows all of what I just walked through, along with their parking calcs on there to show the feasibility of fitting everything onto this site.
Is there a reason this wasn't in the pack? Yeah. I was gonna ask that.
Yeah, I got this just a few days ago, this plan.
What is blue and what is purple?
Blue is phase 3, purple is phase 2, and red is phase 1.
Is there a time frame they have to remain in those AMI limits?
50 years. Okay, I'm gonna move on. We can come back to that. Sustainability. Sometimes in our DAs, we see LEED standards being followed. They are going to be following Enterprise Green Communities requirements for sustainability. So walking through the concessions that the city's going to be giving, the reduction in parking and setbacks allows the developer to fit everything on site. The rent limits imposed by those LIHTC restrictions are probably going to have a similar effect to what the AEH requirements would be, as far as providing housing for local people. We know they're not going to be second homes. And then the third bullet here is just about the complexity of this site. They had to go through townhome platting on top of townhome platting and have a very dense, interesting site here. So that's why we made their new process. Okay, that is the end of my brief. You can ask me questions, or we do have the applicant.
Yeah, if you you're willing, do you want to come up? Yeah.
We did formally open public hearing.
Not yet. Not yet. I will maybe have the applicant present and then we can open the public hearing, chat and close it. Yes, quick. Definitely keep the slides up, Joanna.
Okay.
I also, just for what it's worth, I think I'm gonna recuse myself from this decision because my company had been approached by them to do some of the renovation of some of their units and otherwise. So I think it would be appropriate if I didn't vote on this item.
Cool. That may present an issue because I was maybe gonna see if Shaylee and myself should recuse ourselves as well.
Oh, no.
If not recuse, probably just note that Give Group has entered into it's a joint partnership with the Moab Area Community Land Trust for our Tract K.
It's also
credits, which is with the LIHTC. So the application included units out at Arroyo Crossing under Mackle, and then also the Amasa property that we're looking at right now. Shaylee and I have zero financial interest, so I think it's appropriate for us not to recuse ourselves, but I do just want to note that for the record for the discussion then.
I was gonna say, as mine does
Yeah.
contain some
Mhm.
financial interest, I think it's most appropriate that I do
Yes.
recuse myself.
I agree.
Yes. Thank you for the three of you being just very prompt to that element in the front of this item. So that's really helpful. And the disclosure item is satisfactory
Yep.
for that if you're not incurring immediate.
Yep.
financial-
Shaylee and I have no financial interest, but we are both on the board of directors for the Moab Area Community Land Trust, who is partnering with Give Group on another half of this project. So, okay, that said, if you want to introduce yourself, just make sure you're speaking into the microphone so our note taker can hear you and the public. This will be recorded. Your name, who you're with, a little background. You're welcome to say whatever you feel is helpful.
Great. Yes. Great to be with you. My name is Amanda Dillon. I first off want to just thank Johanna and Corey for all their hard work. I feel like our conversation started before August of this year, so really appreciate everything they've done to facilitate this process. I'm here on behalf of Give Development, my employer, and Develop by Women, a nonprofit that I'm the board chair of that I started with another Give employee. Give's kind of mission is to build communities that really try to promote affordability, resiliency, sustainability, and kind of interconnectedness. And Develop by Women's mission is to essentially elevate women into roles of owners and decision makers in the real estate development space, because we feel that when women have a seat at the table, our communities really thrive. So Amasa Apartments, you've gotten a little bit of a sneak peek at kind of the proposal. Oh, you do have my
Sorry.
slide here.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't notice that. Perfect. This project for us started back in early 2024 when we acquired the property. We acquired it from owners who had developed 36 affordable houses, townhomes there back in 1995. So one of the first things that we wanted to do was get out into the community and let the residents of the units themselves, plus the neighbors, know what our vision for the site was going to be. And so we brought poster boards and pizza and music and games to them and got input on our early site plan at the time, and then just some broad goals. And mostly got positive receptivity to the ideas. A lot of people said that the grass there in the middle where we're going to be hoping to develop 44 units is a big use of water that could be spent better. So they were kind of happy to see a better use for that grass. Go to the next one. So Amasa Apartments, it's going to be building diverse forms of affordable housing. So as Johanna has already kind of presented, there are the first two phases, which are rent restricted for 50 years. And I should say that will extend the affordability period on the current 36 units there that is set to expire in 10 years. So we're adding 40 years to that affordability. And we will be setting aside various units in those housing units for people with disabilities, formerly unsheltered, as well as victims of domestic violence. We're also going to be adding a clubhouse to the property, a playground, which we looked back at the original development for these units, and there, I think, was supposed to have been a playground here. Not sure if it got put in and removed, but we're going to be adding one. Okay. And then a leasing office. Right now, the property is managed by someone who also works at Hunt Ridge just down the road. So we think it is going to be a more successful property if someone who manages it is actually on site. We're aiming to have it be efficient. It's going to be all electric. Give has been building all electric since 2016. And so with that, it'll have a carbon neutral impact on the immediate environment. We are going to aim for net zero through a large solar array, both on the roofs and over carports. And we're also designing the project, the new construction in particular, to have a passive active design with a really efficient building envelope, centralized systems, EV chargers, and then enterprise green communities and Energy Star standards, which is kind of the standard for LIHTC projects. LEED is often very cost prohibitive, and most projects that get Utah Housing Corporation tax credits use the EGC and Energy Star standard. We've also been working with these partners in the community to basically work with the community as early on as possible. We had some even design conversations with Seek Haven about what makes a unit feel safer for someone who might be a victim of domestic violence, and have been working with both HASU and the Moab Valley Multicultural Center. They will be working with us to get set-asides fill for those disadvantaged populations. This is just Johanna's site plan. So this kind of shows, just to give an overview again, phase 1 is in red. So rehabbing 6 units, and then building 44 in those 2 buildings in the front. And then the clubhouse and the leasing office are over there to the right, and the playground would be just to the right of that. Phase 2 will add 8 units to that other kind of half circle onto the left, rehabbing the remaining 30. And then in the future, we would like to build in those corners a for sale affordable product. That's the goal. This is just in case anyone had questions about what EGC entails. This is kind of like a backup slide in case anyone wants to know more about it.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the slide. I remember when you all were first contemplating this, doing the community meetings, our executive director at the Land Trust attended the meetings, and people that I know. I appreciate you blurring the children's faces out too. I know those kids. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah.
That was really nice.
Yeah.
But I know that the overall remarks were that they were pleased that you seem to be, one, really responsive to the neighboring community. We know that obviously people want housing, but the idea of having a larger product built in your, across your fence line is something that can obviously cause a little bit of like discomfort sometimes with the adjacent neighbors, but it seemed like by and large, I think you headed off those concerns really well by actually talking to people, tweaking your site plans a little bit and making that. So I just want to note that I was really impressed with that sort of how you started things. And I think that was really, really smart, because I think, there's 10 neighbors on Huntridge that could have totally gummed up the works here for you. And I really think that you all went about it right by approaching them and seeing what they wanted and what their concerns were first before really getting too far down the line. So, frankly, well done. And I'm excited. I was really excited that you all did that too, because I do think we need obviously more projects like this. That has been sort of a I don't think waste of space is a good way to describe it, but yeah, it's outdated as far as a use of that very nice large parcel that is close to things, hopefully more walkable in the future as we sort of get our trails back and things figured out. But I mean, incredibly important spot, particularly for our seniors, low income populations, disabled populations, and like you said, people that are served by those various nonprofits that you've been talking to. So I will go ahead and open the public hearing at 6:32 p.m. We'll leave it open until we're done with the discussion, just in case anyone shows up or we get any emails. Yeah, if folks have questions for Amanda or
Obviously, I'm excited because I think affordable housing is a big issue. So I'm super excited about what's happening there. From the moment I moved here, I was like, why is there a giant patch of grass in the middle of this apartment building? I'd say my only question is, I understand the need for reducing the parking, and that on average, even on a 4-bedroom, you're gonna just have a larger family that may only be able to afford one car. I do think that we're having some parking concerns coming up at Arroyo Crossing and some other locations around town that I've been noticing. And that would be like the one question is, where would a second car even go? Because there's not really, parking nearby. And to say that they're not gonna have second vehicles, I think is pretty unrealistic in Utah. And what would even be the enforcement? Are they gonna have like numbered spots? How do you prevent that? So that would be my one question.
Yeah, no, it's a great one. We deal with the question of parking a lot. Building in Salt Lake, we tend to build in transit-oriented zones out there, and the city often allows for parking reduction, and we get this question a lot. So I think it's extremely valid. So the requirement would be that I think the bedrooms or the units that have 2 bedrooms or larger have 1.5 parking stalls. So it would be a permitted system. And so people would have like hanging permits in their car. And so of the total spots that we have available, everyone would get one. And then I think it would be like a lottery system for those kind of additional half ones. We haven't figured that part out, but we would do something that, seemed equitable for everybody. And in terms of what we've seen in Salt Lake is that since the property is going to have several units that are at the 25% AMI, which are also what UHC considers units that are set aside for the formerly unsheltered, those populations don't have cars quite as often as populations in the higher AMI bands. It's not to say it doesn't happen. I know a lot of unsheltered people live in their cars. So
yeah, I was gonna say Moab might be might be the one place where that doesn't necessarily hang true.
Yeah. So essentially, the property is zoned for, I think, like depending on the acreage you look at of the property, like around 98, 99, 100 units. And I think because the way that it was laid out initially isn't the most efficient design. So we want to make sure that we can add as much affordable housing in such a centralized location as possible, especially with the beautifully redesigned Cane Creek Boulevard, the complete street. It's so close to downtown Moab. We feel like people could walk. So that was kind of the compromise, is having basically 1 unit or 1 bedroom and then 1.5 for the larger bedroom units, with the exception of the corner parcels, which we have asked for just 1 stall. So that's it was just to be able to build to the density that the site already allows.
Yeah, I'd love to highlight what the last thing that you just said is. It's only for phase 3 and they are providing a space. So maximum, we're losing 6 spaces.
Yeah.
If they were to build all two or more bedroom, otherwise they would be following code.
Yeah, that makes sense. And is there, my brain isn't working right now. There's still parking along King Creek? No.
There's quite a little bit.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, if we were to go back to the site plan,
Yeah.
you would see that as this development does actually extend up and around beyond the King Creek frontage on Aspen, and I'm forgetting the other street, Huntridge, right there. There will be, I believe,
Mhm.
public parking
Yeah.
up into that section of the neighborhood that will
Yeah.
have access to those sites,
But not on King.
not
Creek
on King
itself.
Creek itself, correct?
Yeah, cause
At least for, I think Shayla, you're saying there are
Those
a
little
few little
many and
stretches of
mix.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think those are,
They're not a lot.
there's one beyond Aspen.
There's
and
one, yeah, there's one in front of
Uh,
Huntridge, there's one.
So, yeah, I think on this, we'll call the arcing stretch, I don't believe there are any of these
Yep.
bulb outs, but there are some in proximity.
Yeah, but I mean, it's, Matt, there's a lot of, I'd say there's a lot of through traffic on King Creek, like obviously with the food bank, with the Episcopal Church, with all of that too. It's literally, we have like a drive-through food bank that's right across the street from the apartments. So there's a lot of vehicle traffic there, but I think the safety of the new road redesign and updates is really helpful for that. Makes it much more walkable. There's no longer like death sidewalks like there used to be, where the sycamores were like growing up through the sidewalks and you're sort of taking your life in your hands. That's better now. So
Will there be
yeah.
visitor parking? That's the other concept I had.
Yeah, I can't, you go, please answer, but I cannot envision an apartment complex that does not have visitor parking if they have tagged permitted parking.
Yeah, so essentially we're building additional parking right in front of the leasing office and clubhouse. And then phase 2 will also build additional parking. So we are we are adding additional parking to accommodate guests. I think it would just be about, again, how that permit system happens, with at least one unit having one permit, and then some kind of lottery system for those like excess parking stalls.
And then just having, I've spoken to some of the neighbors who live on Huntridge. I know people who attended the meeting and everything, and the things that they mentioned that they were excited seemed to be part of the design or were happening. I don't know, Johanna, could you pull the rough draft site plan up again? Were, I think, the fact that there was parking on the back of the lot, that the larger new buildings were more King Creek side and less neighborhood side, so that it wasn't like, peering down into people's backyards with the larger new structure, which seemed very, very popular, very important, really well shielded lights. So same thing. So there weren't lights going into people's houses or backyards in the adjacent neighborhood. And then just lots of, I know you don't have your landscaping plan on here, but lots of vegetation, particularly along sort of that back side. Is that still kind of all in process?
Yes, and actually, we did a little bit of a redesign with our parking lot. Kind of it's hard to indicate really, but right there, right north of your mouth, right there, there's a lot of kind of established large juniper trees there. And so we oriented our parking lot a little bit up in the attempt to save those because they created a great buffer and shield behind those properties right there. So we did adjust design based on some of those comments and conversations that we had with those neighbors. We also, since acquiring the property, have changed the lights and shielded the lights on the back of the existing units. For some reason, the lights, they're dark sky compliant, but they're like on the second story of the building.
Yep.
And so they even sent us a picture once, and they're like, you could have a soccer game back here, like in the middle of the night. So we put some additional shields on that, again, just trying to be as responsive as possible to their concerns.
Great. No, that's really great. I just wanted to see if all those were sort of still captured, because I know that was part of some initial discussions with neighbors again, which I think is really great. It's amazing how simple sometimes the friction points are to solve, potentially with larger, denser, affordable housing and adjacent established neighborhoods. It's not always that hard, I think. And I hope this is an example of how on the new developer's side and how on the existing neighbor's side, like there really is room to make it work for everybody. So yeah, that's cool. Yeah, other questions from other planning commissioners, comments, anything about the project? Awesome.
Yeah, I love the thought going into it, and the intentionality of all the conversations you've had with residents, neighbors, and local nonprofits, and the kind of intention to serve really specific marginalized groups in our community. So that's really exciting to see, as well as the, the all electric and the solar components. I was wondering about the units that will be rehabilitated, if current residents will be able to stay in unit during that process, or if not, if there's a temporary relocation plan.
Yes, it's a great question. And I was actually at the property today talking to some of those residents. So we have 2 units that we've kept vacant in that building. There's 6 units there, and we've held them vacant now for feels like almost a year. And the thought is that we would rehabilitate those 2 units and then ask the residents in the other 4, do they want to move into the newly rehabbed units, or do they want to move out into short-term rentals and then moved back into their exact unit. So I was able to connect with 2 of the 4 residents today, and they didn't have it. It was all new, so they didn't have a decision made up. But the plan, ideally, we don't dislocate them at all, and we're able to do somewhat of a staggered kind of. You don't have to move out somewhere for like maybe up to 2 months and then move back into your unit. You could just move into a newly renovated unit, but some people are attached to their particular unit. So we are planning to, if they choose, relocate them for right now. It's about 6 to 8 weeks on renovating each of those units and trying to do it as tied together as possible. So we may have to relocate some of them, but they also have the option on moving into the newly renovated ones.
But you'll hold the existing tenants as like first priority on new units.
Yes. Their lease basically will stay intact, so it doesn't change at all. Their rents actually may come down slightly because right now their units are 60% AMI, and the highest that we'll have is 50% AMI. One of the residents I spoke to today said, she was like, "Are you guys building bigger units?" And she's in a 2-bedroom, and I said, "Yes, we have 3 and 4 bedrooms." So there I can see some people even wanting to move into a larger, more family-sized unit.
Will that disqualify anyone with the lower AMI from, like, if someone's at 60, for example, and it goes to 50?
No, yeah, we looked into that. Utah Housing Corporation has a policy that we can't kick anybody out even if their unit AMI qualification comes down. But obviously would apply to whoever comes after them.
Okay.
Thanks.
I think so. I like that you're giving residents the option. Because I would be one of those people who's like, I really like my existing spot, and they go find somewhere else so I can have my like exact little out the back window.
Yes.
So I feel seen.
So we are talking about the plan a lot. I'd love to bring up how we're going to the process moving forward.
Sure.
How when it's time, we will fully evaluate the plan here and have a chance to ask even more questions at that time.
Correct.
So the red box that we have here will be coming to you all, just like the DA. The preliminary plat and the preliminary plan, and then all of these finals for phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 will just go through the development review team and then be issued a record of decision from me to move then on to building permits. Along with each phase down here at the bottom, you can see they're going to be also negotiating subsequent DA and improvements agreements with all the phases as well. Is there any questions about the process?
I did want to highlight this, and this is something we've developed in-house this little flow chart. But the amount of time we're joking about tattooing this on our heads because we bring it up at nearly every meeting,
Mm-hmm.
because it's such a useful tool to understand how land use rights and the approval process works for most things. But what we're doing, and in this DA, what the function is two-part. One, it is authorizing the development to act with the concessions, basically securities of the development, securities of the city of what the layout and product that we're actually getting. But it also establishes this very custom process, which is amalgamation of a couple of our processes, a platting exercise process, plan approval process, which the most kindred one we have is similar to a master plan development, but that master plan development that we have is quite robust and can honestly be quite clunky in a lot of ways. So what we've done is actually with our master plan is sophisticate it to a little bit more of an administrative point to not have each phase be so burdened coming back through an overly robust public process for something that is administratively applicable, meaning it's already been approved. The reason I kind of was saying, hey, let's show this really quick as we're tying up this DA approval is where the public's voice matters. So this is obviously the public hearing to establish the DA that establishes this process. So as this goes to city council, the ability for testimony isn't gone, but it definitely has changed from the public hearing side. But at that point, this process and the standards that would be applicable, which are in the DA, they're noted in particular by site, will be administrative at the approval of this DA. Therefore, as it comes to planning commission for the approval of the preliminary plan and preliminary plat, that is the last time the public and the planning commission will see this as it progresses through its approval phasing of each final phase for entitlement and construction. And that's often when we get way down the line, public's like, I never even heard about this. Where is this happening? We're trying to balance a elegant and clean way for these applicants to move as quickly as they possibly can, while still obviously trying to maintain process. So this is the big overture for the remainder of this project, for more or less. So on that note, like Johanna said, this will be coming back for you both for plan and plat to walk through the specifics of the plan to ensure they meet our standards. That being said, there's still both great securities for the developer and for the city if, as the project evolves, which it inevitably, of course, will, and changes within that, all of those amendments will come back to the original authorizing body. So nothing will be built that hasn't been seen by this body in a final form. So phase 3, if everything goes to plan, you won't see it. It'll just go as it's been conceived within preliminary. But if they, with phase 3, do want to change elements, whether that's in the phasing development agreement or improvements agreements or the platting locations or even just the plan content, they will come back for amendments through this body. But that was kind of the, again, big note is it is a custom process. So as long as we're recognizing that, it's very much how we hope to approach many of our new policies and procedures with our land use code update. So this was a great opportunity to work with Give, what works from a lending perspective, what works on a more dynamic level with the developers. I know we didn't make it super easy to get to this point with Give, but they were a really good partner in having us work through and do the customization of it. So appreciate the time, but that was my big tee off that this DA is doing two things at once. This is the other thing.
That makes sense.
Thank you.
Question, and I'm completely blanking on what it was. We were talking about, difference in year terms between what AEH requirements would be and the LIHTC.
Sure.
My LIHTC is 50 years. AEH would have been.
Yes, and so that's a great distinction here is the when we're talking about the exchange or concessions here, we're moving from what was our use parameter by right. So our standard zoning AEH, not a negotiated AEH contract, which often have year lengths and those types of terms. The what we'll call use parameter or permitted use by right AEH doesn't have similar restrictions. It's only as applicable as the use in which it's
Yeah.
operating. So in this case, we're moving from AEH to LIHTC, which is kind of like saying we're moving from attainable housing to affordable housing as far as the restriction patterns of AEH to something that's more akin to a pad.
Yeah.
So this project is much more like a pad. We're just getting rid of the duplicate restriction for occupancy because it's already contemplated in a much more robust way with
Yeah.
the LIHTC. So AEH typically doesn't have a deed restriction length. It's only restricted as so long as that use is on the property.
Yeah.
Unless we, with some of these other groups where we're negotiating a contract for AH, like our former Blue Bison, that was a DA AEH that had terms of that restriction in it. So
cool.
I don't know, that wasn't super clear
thank
because it is messy, but that was a great question.
That's great. Any other questions for city staff or the applicants?
No, I think we're all asked.
All right. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. Johanna, could we get a
Absolutely.
copy of that presentation?
Yeah.
I just want to like look closer at everything just because we didn't see the potential site plans and that kind of stuff. All right. Oops, I just closed out of my agenda accidentally. Hold on, y'all. Gosh darn.
And this is where now I'm struggling. Did we open it before?
We opened it.
Second comments? Okay, I
Yep.
thought so.
We opened it.
We did
That
it.
said, I will close the public hearing now at 6:53 p.m. We can have some further discussion. We can ask more questions, obviously. Now that we've seen the presentation.
I think Joanna has something to say.
Oh, no.
No.
It's excited. So, yeah. Sitting there excited. But this would be consideration and possible recommendation to approve this item if folks are all right with the development agreement as it stands, as explained. Future questions, as usual, we can also take action at a later meeting, table it if there are things we need specific direction to city staff for additional information. But otherwise, this is in our hands. This is a public hearing. This is a development agreement. We are not the final authority on this because it's a development agreement. So this is the recommendation to city council.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to.
Miles doesn't want to do it one last time.
Do you want to do it, Miles?
He's
Well, I'm
recused him-
technically
he's
recusing myself,
recused
so I
himself.
can't make
So you
motions.
can't.
I know, I'm just giving you a hard time. You are allowed to ask questions though, Miles, if you have any questions, certainly, in the discussion, but just, as you've recused yourself, don't.
Honestly, you guys hit most of my questions. What the difference between the LIHTC restriction and the AEH restriction was going to look like and why we were willing to give that up was one of the top ones, and that got answered. So
Great.
I appreciate the thorough discussion, and yep.
Cool. Well, sorry you're missing out on this one, Miles. We'll have somebody else take it away.
I will go ahead and forward a positive recommendation of approval of the development agreement for 57 West Cane Creek Boulevard, parcel 01-0001-0200 between Amasa Holdings LLC and the city of Moab, Utah, with
No modification.
no modifications to the Moab City Council.
Okay, we have a motion for a positive recommendation from Jill. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, a second from Carolyn. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor of the motion on the table, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion passes 4-0 with Commissioner Miles Lofton recusing himself. Great. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing things progress.
I know. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Next, discussion items, 5.1, discussion of the wildland urban interface. Once again, I assume this is Alexi time. Come on up.
It's the wooey.
It is the wooey. That's what we call it.
It is buoy. You're gonna get all kinds of Alexi time.
Guys, I'm running low on candy. What are we gonna do?
I have plenty of Whoppers.
Oh, ooh, I haven't had a Whopper in
A Whopper.
10 years, probably. Yeah, get one of those. Hey, I'm gonna have really dry mouth though after if I remember Whoppers correctly.
They do kind of give you a drug. Oh, thanks. Thanks.
Okay, so what we are going to go through today is the state has different requirements to be prepared for wildfires. The community wildfire preparedness plan is one that'll be going to City Council in January. They also passed HB 48 in the last session, which is requiring us to adopt a state code for the wildland or WUI, the wildland urban interface, and also a map to go with it. So the structure of this is I'm going to try to do a little like crash course and what the components of this are, and then we'll have a discussion about what we want to do. Okay, just to illustrate urban, WUI, wildland. This is a little ambiguous, and this is probably where a lot of our discussion will be, because where exactly is the WUI, like the interface of the two, what counts as a space between is kind of flexible. So it is somewhat clear what is a wildland and what is an urban, but not exactly where our WUI is. HB 48 also designates a number of responsibilities to different groups. The Utah DNR is going to create a map of high-risk properties in the state. Those are on the structure exposure score, which we'll look at later, things that are rated 7 or above, or at least that's their recommendation. Now, there might be some variation based on whether on-the-ground knowledge matches the state maps. Associated with that is assessing properties annually, and then assessing a fee to high-risk property owners to pay for the assessments and the WUI program that they're initiating. Counties would collect those fees that were assessed by the state. They also can cover their own costs with those fees. And then for properties that are in the county, they need to adopt the WUI code. Grand County has already done that. It's already on the books for them, and also create a map of which properties are affected by that. The recommendation by the state is a 5 or greater on the structure exposure score. And then enforcement. The city responsibilities are basically the same. We need to adopt the code, which we haven't yet. We need to create a map of who is included in the application of that code, and then we need to enforce it once we have it. Residents, if they're on the state high-risk map, then they will be responsible for those fees and also having their property assessed. They are allowed to decline having a property assessed, and if they do, they'll pay the highest fee. The city map here would have requirements for people who are owning these properties and building things on them. So residents or anybody who's trying to construct something on one of these properties, new construction would meet the code. Existing construction requires defensible space, and then we'll talk a little bit more about their other obligations. As a background for where we're going with this is trying to talk about some of the factors of wildfire risk. So hazard and vulnerability, and then under that, some kind of subsets of like the actual likelihood of having a fire and the intensity of that fire, which is especially relevant to us because we have a lot of rocks and kind of sparse vegetation. So in some places, our hazard is relatively low. The odds of having an intense fire there are not high. Now, we do have some exceptions to that, and we'll get to that with the maps. Vulnerability is more looking at the actual property, and is it close to where that fire might be, and also how is the property built up so it would be exposed to a fire if one were nearby. So that gets more into landscaping or how the actual buildings are constructed. Okay,
getting a little more in depth on the construction side, and then we'll talk a little bit about the landscape side. The actual code, so this is the state code that they are requiring us to adopt. It's not something that we can modify. New construction needs to use fire-rated construction materials. This includes things like the roof, the windows, siding, decks, pretty much all aspects of this, including the vents. I'm thinking like there's also
doors, projections. When you're thinking about a shell of a primary structure, the framing of that, typically that is what's included.
Right. And anything like fire arresters, things like that for chimneys. So it includes pretty much the entire envelope with some kind of fire rating, and it progresses as you are at a higher risk. It also requires water supply in specific proximity and access and specific proximity to these at-risk properties. It also requires defensible space before somebody can occupy it, and then continued management of vegetation. For existing construction, it does not necessarily have to come into compliance immediately. If there are unsafe conditions, those may need to be corrected. Defensible space is also required. You wouldn't have to move out, but you would have to implement it while you were there. And then there are also some things.
What does that mean, the defensible space?
Yeah, next slide. Okay, I'll get to it. It is basically a perimeter around the house that you reduce the risk of a fire spreading to your house. So reducing vegetation. So they would be required to manage the landscape, which would be, a lower cost thing than necessarily changing your roof. Roofs, however, if you did do some kind of re-roofing that would affect 25% of your roof in a given year, you would have to replace the whole thing. If you added anything new or did other new construction projects, that particular aspect of the building would need to come into compliance. Like if you were redoing your siding would have to. If you're redoing your windows would have to. So it wouldn't necessarily bring your whole structure into compliance. If you redid your roof, you don't have to also do your siding, but if you touch it, you would change it. And then you need to add fire arresters, like something to catch sparks from anything that's basically flammable on your property. Like if you have a chimney from a fireplace, a barbecue, a fire pit, something like that.
So this would be triggered by pulling a building permit for your roof or your siding or something, not just from that annual assessment cycle?
Yeah, so sorry, I'm going to go back here. With the different levels of this, the only thing that the Utah DNR map would trigger is doing those properties and assessments. In order to have to do the WUI code, you would have to be adopted or identified on the city map. So we as a city would identify who has to go by this code. And the state would like for our map to include the properties they identify on their map because they would identify the highest risk and we're doing something a step lower. However, their map hasn't been released yet. So we're not sure if the things we identify will be on their map, but we could also update later. Part of the code is that you would regularly update your map. So if we adopted a map that didn't reflect the state, but we later wanted to update that, we could. So we would be choosing which properties have to do everything. And it would be triggered, like you said, by a building permit. Okay, defensible space. So this is a landscaping aspect of this. There's a lot on here. Essentially, the state code looks at your level of risk and then increases your distance of defensible space depending on that risk. So at moderate risk, you would need 30 feet of space that has reduced vegetation. Your trees need to be farther apart. They need to be pruned partway up the trunk in order to reduce the risk of fire spreading. If you're at a high risk, 50 feet, extreme risk, 100 feet, or it could end at the end of your property line because not everybody would have 100 feet between their house and their property line. So this would be basically how you would first treat your landscape. If somebody had to come into compliance with this code, they might have to remove some vegetation. And then from there on out, they would need to maintain it to that level. If they were also identified in the state map, then the assessor would also look at this, and that would be part of their annual assessment to make sure they're maintaining their property in line with the WUI code.
So this would supersede the landscaping ordinance?
That would be part of something we can decide. There are some cases that where the landscape code could conflict like with this. For example, if you were on a small property and you had big trees in your front yard, they might be too close to your house. In a lot of cases, because the landscape code is relatively flexible about where the 25% of your vegetation would be, it might not conflict. But essentially, we would decide, or we could have them go through an exception process, and then they would say, you know, in order to have defensible space around my house, I can't follow the landscape code.
I was kind of screening and buffering, where we have mandatory intervals of vegetation, particularly along the perimeter. So that's kind of, you know, the street trees is what we were alluding to. But yeah, I think that was well captured.
All right, so what we've got to work with this evening before we get to maps is we have differing levels of risk and different tools that we can use to try to match with that level of risk. And we need to decide which tools match which level of risk, and that will determine where codes apply for us. So high risk, this is not something we control. The state adopts that map and they will designate those properties. As we talked about, that's the assessment and the fee. The city map, we do get to choose. We do have to adopt the code, but we don't have to designate any particular properties to comply with the code. So we get to make a choice there about which properties are appropriate for that level of risk, if the WUI code is addressing the risk that we're seeing in our city. And then we also have no requirements from the state on moderate or low risk properties, but we are allowed to do something there. So if we think that there's some level of preparation that is appropriate, but it's not the state WUI code, then we can adopt our own code. We can also obviously provide education to people, which is already happening. So now we get to the discussion in the maps. This is a structure exposure score that the state has developed, and I'll pull up their online interface in a minute. We have the city limits of Moab there. The stuff in the middle that's white is not considered at risk. And then as you get into the darker orange, it gets up into higher risk. There are some things that seem not quite in line with the levels of risk that we see around here, as in it shows lower risk along waterways because there's water there, but that's actually where we have vegetation.
No.
And also you can kind of see that there's some areas like in the middle of the river that are highly flammable, or on the rocks where there's not a lot of vegetation. So there's some things here that are probably more or less calculated by formula, but don't necessarily match what we see on the ground. And then the other map that was in the community wildfire preparedness plan that you would have seen, this was generated by Rim to Rim. And the parts that are in the middle of the city that are like natural, like not yellow and surrounded by red, those are the areas they identified as being at the interface of wildland. And then the yellow that they've identified there is basically the stuff that is not, based on kind of a preliminary assessment. We also have a number of other maps and things going, but we have more or less some questions here about what is our urban wildland interface and what tools are appropriate for the levels of risk we're seeing in the city. And then I also have some goofy property diagrams, because we could run into a situation where we have properties. You might recognize this from the landscape code. And then we could have a wildland urban interface that is not aligning with property lines. So it could run at the back of your property. It could run on the edge of your property. It could actually run through your house or include the majority of your property. And if we're looking at how this code applies, we need to come up with a map that identifies the properties that need to meet the WUI. And the properties may or may not totally match what we're seeing in the natural landscape.
Well, how do we do that with like floodplain? Because obviously that's the case for floodplains too.
Yeah.
Corey's smiling.
You wanna?
We're getting there.
All right.
All right. Well, I don't have any other slides here. We do think that in a lot of ways it is similar to the floodplain, with the difference being that fire is more contagious than a flood. As in, if your neighbor's property floods, it's not necessarily going to catch. You won't necessarily flood because they did. Whereas if your neighbor's house catches on fire and their landscape catches on fire, it might just by association spread. Do you want to talk more about how we handle floodplains?
Contagious.
I think I may, but maybe let conversation begin. Unless we want to, at this point, kind of get to well, back to our adopted map options, and then maybe we talk about details like that later. I don't know where we want to start with that. I guess, do we want to discuss the recommendation we're facing and what our attorney believes we're at?
Yeah. So currently, our recommendation is that we adopt a WUI map with no properties identified for the state code. And then we also simultaneously work on a city code that provides different levels of preparedness for properties that are in the city. The current WUI code is pretty onerous for something that is built in town. It's built more in line with if you had a cabin in the woods. So if we do that, like if we identify codes in the city, they're going to have all of those things in place on their properties, and it could make it more expensive to develop, and it might be a stronger tool than we need for the level of risk that they have. So we could create a more tailored tool to the kind of fire risk that we have in Moab, and then we could make a map for the Moab code. So that would be the staff recommendation. However, I'm happy to discuss other options, and then we can also do the state map for the structural exposure score is not high resolution, but we can get in and look at areas of the city if we want to look at where some of the higher levels of risk are identified by the state.
With that prompt, could we move to the heat map for the risk by the state? So understanding the scoring of what we're seeing here is that as we're looking, and again, understanding this is a little bit hard to diagnose at this resolution, but generally speaking, we're not in a risk category of warrant. However, there are some spots here that do kick into a tier that might qualify, but how technically accurate that might be is why we're considering a adoption of 0 until we get the state's assessment and then readopt based off of that for particular things. That's when I'm kind of considering option 1. It's our attorney's suggestion. More or less, I think from this map, which is going to kind of spur us to our next option 2, is you can obviously see in our wetlands area, the Conservancy to the northwest of the city, there are some designated spots. They are not within city limits, so this is where it gets a little interesting for us. So where those heat spots might exist within the wetlands, while they're out of our jurisdiction, they property or parcel, which is how you designate WUI, it's not where that interface might live, it kicks in and establishing the entirety of a property. So when we're looking at the map that Alexi showed where there may be an actual interface, that's where we want to, through a city tool, use a much more surgical option versus a large parcel getting lumped in with something that may be a small portion of that property might actually be legitimately designated. So again, that being said, can we go to the next map that was the rim to rim generation?
Yeah, let me.
I'm going to try to annotate. We'll see how this goes. One of the perks of doing a Zoom share system. So using this, I mean, it kind of having the coloration of the satellite imagery. So what we would kind of be identifying is something more along this boundary-ish, with maybe a secondary potential identification of this peninsula into city limits area, all within the Conservancy area still. The majority of it is still within a single property or within a few properties. So if we were to contemplate a WUI designation, though those sections of the wetlands that are in the Conservancy parcel would be likely the ones we would designate. The important distinction here is who is triggered and who is not by the WUI. So if your parcel is now designated WUI, like it would be with a floodplain, you're developing in that context. So if we were to take this agricultural parcel right here, oh, you can't see my cursor. This agricultural parcel right here that is currently within the county, but eventually annexing. While it may not be designated the WUI, it will develop, but will be clearly an interface area. So now we're talking about what we would say is maybe a city's sophistication of an interface, or in our code, which we can look at, is what some, working title, we're calling it a defensible fire interface zone, where we actually identify a surgical area that within that you have more or less a buffering type mechanism, so a defensible space, and we'll try to very likely not reinvent the wheel here, but adopt some of the zones that we discussed to create a buffer that is not the entirety of your property, including your front door, if we really only are trying to buffer on the back side of it. A lot more work to be done there, but this is why when we're saying looks of adopting a map with zero, when clearly there is some risk, is we're not trying to say that there isn't risk and we're trying to avoid that or adopt zero. It's trying to be sophisticated in how we approach it, so we're not lumping properties in to an overwhelmingly onerous degree that for our community maybe isn't. I've been saying from a staff perspective, the WUI is a little bit more of a sledgehammer. I'd like to add the sledgehammer where it's necessary, but then maybe use a little bit more of a chisel interior to our community, especially as you can tell, which is going to be running through our floodway corridors where that vegetation is naturally growing because of the water source there. So that's my spiel on option one, option two, and maybe where we want to go from there. If there's any questions or anything else from staff, what we're thinking.
So if we say option one, because it does feel like it'd be better just to adopt the code and then learn as we build this map. We say go with option one. Just reading because of the summary.
Mhm.
Then you guys go back and work on option one, and then we come back and approve it to be forwarded to city council, or like what are the next steps?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think if we agree that we want to adopt a map with no properties, then we can bring that at the next meeting. A map with nothing adopted, the code is already required by the state, so we could move that on. And if we wanted to move on to the second piece of that, which is coming up with something that was more tailored to the properties here, we would keep working on that and then send it to city council when we're ready.
And this would be through ordinance adoption of our code, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we
it'd go
would.
through the public hearing process, that
Mhm.
public hearing like we saw tonight,
Yeah,
and then
that makes
recommendation to
sense.
council.
More sense to me than sledgehammer approach from the get-go.
Yeah, I think there's things that need to be sort of dialed and finessed a little bit, particularly because this does implicate assessments and
Mhm.
new requirements and all those kind of things. I think it's something where we set the framework and then
Mhm.
iron out the details. Again, talking about the last meeting, like with a robust public information process.
Yeah, this would be this would be a lot. And that's, I mean, the opinion of our building official, opinion of attorney who's currently working with communities that are engaged in the law and developers that are developing within excuse me, not the WUI, is it's very onerous, comparative to what we're talking about, how it's similar to our floodplain management. It's significantly more onerous. So if that gives you any sense of how our community is already starting to try to deal with our floodplain management system, it's that much more so. But again, we're not wanting to shy away from truly being effective in a defensible option or regulations, but doing it in a way that is more tailored to us and we actually have control over. It makes a lot more sense, I think, from staff's perspective, and would likely, again, from the assessment, not have maybe as deep level implications, but be just as effective.
Yeah.
I agree with that in a big way. I also think it's worth noting that, like, clearly from the state's map versus the one we generated with rim to rim, there's a different understanding of where there is actually potential for wildfire in our community. And I think it's also worth noting that essentially, like, the riparian zones and the type of vegetation we have in the riparian area versus what would be like a pine forest are going to burn very differently. And the state, I don't think, is reaching that level of distinction. I mean, when you look at some of their maps, like areas that are rock or maybe sparsely junipered have higher risk areas than riparian areas. And clearly that's not quite accurate. So I think the more we can avoid having to implement these kind of heavy-handed, onerous state requirements and instead are able to generate requirements that take into consideration the type of vegetation that are in our wildlife interface areas and how it burns and how, quickly a fire spreads through them, how just the difference of like, an area where it has large cottonwoods, if you clean up most of the brush and debris underneath them, it can be pretty resistant to anything but serious, significant wildfire. And you still don't have to like have 100-foot gap between the trees in your house. So I think kind of being able to tailor that in would be very important to our community since we're not facing the same considerations that a community surrounded by like pine forest would be.
And the consideration for risk here is just from wildfire, not from human started fires.
Well,
Uh,
that is, some wildfires are human caused, so.
Yeah.
We,
And
I think it's just
fire.
Yeah.
I think fire, but not like electrical fires, like,
But I think
yeah.
importantly, the wildland urban interface is not necessarily high fire risk within a city. It really is meant to capture
Mhm.
that sort of crossover between more of the backcountry, like lightly managed, differently managed, unmanaged, whatever you want to call it, and habitated areas. So, like, I don't know actually, but like Pack Creek in town, high fire risk maybe as it stands now, but not necessarily the wildland urban interface because of what it kind of where it falls. Whereas if it were, up on Ray Mesa or something, kind of different in that regard. I don't know, Lexi, what you're.
We get to decide really,
Mhm.
like since we pick the map, we decide what we think is a wildland urban interface, which is where we get into that ambiguity of some areas, the creeks are pretty wild, but in other places like around Woody's, not so wild.
In a different way.
Yeah, different kind of wild. So we get to decide what we think. And that's where we do want your perspective on this. And we'll still have to decide if we decide to do the zero map, and then we also do a city code, we're still gonna have to decide on a map. It'll just have different requirements in the code.
I think it'll be more
My-
specific.
Mhm.
If I can, I'll go ahead. If I can share a screen.
Yeah.
And this is again jumping ahead to where we're getting to next talking about the code. Is I'll share. This is where this section would be reserved or live in the code until we've established the ordinance. So again, you'll be familiar with this from last meeting as we really quickly went through this. But within our development review procedures, we're gonna through districting establish the interface, whether it be boundary or zone or however that's distinguished. So that will be one element. And then in our standards, if your property were to be going to develop, we would be going through this review of a filter of what applies, what doesn't, just like we do with floodplain. This is where they really would be triggered in a really similar way, processed in a really similar way. In fact, maybe I'll show you. It's all under environmental management. So within that, flood damage prevention, which is a code we currently have, is built out with our consultants a little bit more with this rewrite. What we're seeing here's how that'd be structured. The very next one that we're gonna be adding would be just that, both in the idea of wild and urban interface, and this is where it lives in the code with its associated map. But we also might include a defensible fire interface requirement and a map associated with that, and then it goes through methods, permitting standards and specific standards and so forth. So again, that's how, when we're talking in this kind of amoebus way of this idea, this is how it'd be structured. It's already contemplated in our code in this way, or will be.
Has there been a mapping exercise of the table of the 10-year area fire history that's in the preparedness plan that was in the packet?
I'm not aware of maps. I mean, I'm aware of different experiments with like what a buffered space and things like that would be in the city. As far as other maps that would be associated with the recommendations or the preparedness methods in the wildfire plan, I'm not aware. I could talk to Rim and see if they have any that were not included in the plan.
Yeah, it would just be interesting to see how like the actual 10-year history of fires tracked to those couple of both the state map and the rim to rim map. in
Yeah,
terms
makes
of,
sense.
Like if the ultimate goal is mitigating the spread of fire and the damage to structures, then I feel like it would just yield some more insights as we're trying to say like, oh, should Pat Creek count as Louis
Totally.
or not, you know?
Mm-hmm.
We, I think, have a staff person that could probably help us pull it together, which would
We
be
can.
really informative when we go to develop our ordinance. That's
Yeah.
a great suggestion. So I'm looking to help remind me when to take note of that. but
Yeah,
Let's do it.
that is, yeah, very doable. So the direction I'm hearing so far is that do we want to move forward with the map that does not identify properties for the state level code?
Yeah. And we have to adopt the state level code this year, but they haven't released their map yet.
Yes. And we won't adopt it this year because we don't have meetings left, but we have already established that we are talking about it. I have heard various accounts of that deadline being extended because of the late launch for some of the tools at the state level. So we would just move it through early next year, and then we could update the map if they released a map that identified properties in Moab, and we agreed.
So do we need to make a motion for that?
We're just discussion item tonight, but your direction will help us come back to you at the beginning of the year next year
Mm-hmm.
for what could be, if it's that simple, is the public
Public
actually
hearing.
just advance that recommendation for the ordinance as a zero map, if you will.
That would be my choice.
Okay, that's good direction. And then Corey, do we want to do anything else on the city level code, or do you just want to wait?
What's the appetite for the commission? I mean, we're already at 7:30.
Mhm.
I've got it's relative. I mean, we can just place kind of a bit of cups in what I'm talking about with the code. So that is relative and would be really informative to me moving forward. And we could just take away from my 30 minutes that I was going to use for other land use items, but that it's just as helpful. But since we're on the topic,
Create the city WUI code.
basically, yeah. I'm trying to term it in a way that is distinguishably different, but also just as apt. So yeah, the working title I have is more or less a defensible fire interface. It's called zone now, but it could be just defensible fire interface, and it's established just like we saw with rim as a boundary, and like we might see with the screening and buffering boundary. Upon that boundary, we will establish regulations that pull you at a defensible zone type, depending what it is. And maybe that's why I think it should be a zone, is that depending on what's on the other side of that boundary, if it is heavily forested, therefore, like Alexi showed in that slide, the intensity and likelihood increases. You're maybe in a different zone on your side. If it's light on this side, then you're light on your side. So that's the sophistication I'm hoping to work towards. We took our first whack at it, and we kind of, on the whiteboard that we had, started experimenting with variables. Obviously, if everything is linear in a perfect scenario, it's really quite, we'll just do it this way. But really, the for me at least, the key approach that we're trying to look at is under the fire code as it exists now. You have development rights, and through in that, so a good example is if setbacks didn't exist, which in some zones they don't, it's zero. The closer you get to a property line, the more you have to fortify your building because you're taking up basically your neighbor's responsible for uh, 5 feet and you're responsible for 5 feet. And collectively that 10 feet through fire code is enough that we say that's enough that fire should not be jumping from structure to structure. So our codes allow structures to get closer together, but the closer they get, the increased rating that they'll have to build to, which is expensive and often onerous, but it's at your voluntary uh, option to get closer and closer. So using that methodology of a kind of expanding it to a property is based on what the intensity or likelihood of a fire risk could be, what you're zoned at for that particular zone of the interface, you could not lose your development rights. That's what I'm trying to get at. You have an option to develop really close to the boundary, but then maybe you are building to full WUI or even more intensive standards than the WUI, but it's our decision on how that actually works specifically. And I think, Miles, you put it really nicely, what the reality of that fire could be doing in that zone. The other element here, if we kind of flash forward, is that if you have a really vegetated property and you just want to put your house right in the middle of it, well, your zone is now probably the entirety of your property. You're building entirely within that interface zone. If you were to clear cut that, in theory, you've totally clear cut it, it's clean and green, using that terminology. That boundary, you've now moved that boundary. So it's more of a living map of what the actual on-site existence is versus this blanket designation. Even if it's totally clear cut, the risk is totally removed. You're still on WUI. Again, hence the sophistication that is in our hands of you can actually move where that boundary is based on how much work and improvement you want to do to your own property. So that's a lot coming at you. There's a lot of regulations within our floodplain development that work in a very similar way. You can raise the elevation of if you're in the 100 year, you can raise the elevation and build there. If you don't choose to raise it, no, you can't build there because you're below the BFD for 100 year. So using that modeling of property rights forward, not trying to damage assessments based off of blanketing designations, but get to the core of actually being defensible. It's a dynamic tool. Our first hack at it illuminated a lot of problems, which is what we saw when stuff isn't like linear, it's all over the place. But having that first work session, I think we're confident we can get to something, but it will be a little bit more sophisticated than I think I even originally thought it might have to be. So we'll have to kind of dig in a little deeper. But that's my take. How'd I do? 4 minutes, 5 minutes on that one?
Does that mean we go home now?
So I'd love to get some feedback on it and then we can move on, but
So
any thoughts on that?
Okay, so it's a interface in the sense of like, I own this parcel and it's in the WUI zone for this, and this reason on the interface. And then you get to say, oh, if I clean this up, then I'm moving the boundary. Like
if it's ours, yeah. If it's not the WUI, because the WUI is just your property is, period.
Right.
And it remains. Because again, I think the WUI is established around big fire, big fuels. Ours is really, it could be a portion of a property or even one property or a portion of it that would be our line that we saw, that penetrating line of our riparian areas is quite narrow. So you can actually, I would say, arguably mitigate your way out of it depending on how effective you are at maintaining that space.
Sorry. That would just be part of like the permitting process.
Exactly. So you'd come and say, the house on the right, top right here, highly vegetated. So we'd say, yeah, your house is fully within zone. That fire is going to hit your house. So you have to fully fire rate your house. But you say the house on the far left may have looked like the one on the far right, but you're willing to and capable and legally can, depending on the trees or whatever it is, remove all those fuels that all of a sudden now that line can move where you've now created defensible space. So it's not a property designation. It's a little bit more articulated. I think there was kind of a joke of, I wish our floodplain maps could be like that earlier. And that is the joke, because once we've established FEMA, that is where the line is. That's where it lives for at least 10 years, if not longer, no matter what you do to the property, to a degree. He's there in these perpetual zones of flow. But so that's when we're looking at updating our FEMA floodway maps, they're looking at improving our system, we're looking at right now doing the same thing where we kind of have this more sophisticated chisel approach for stormwater issues. Because when we talk about flooding in FEMA, it's not really articulating for what's happening in the community with water, but there's clearly water flow, stormwater issues at surface level, not just in the creek. So how can we be better? How can we be more responsive to some of those damage issues? Because it's clearly a problem for us. Fire thankfully hasn't been as devastating, but I think, you know, there's property owners that have lost, you know, it is a problem. It's not fictitious. But that being said, this is all proposal. So the commission can say, I don't think fires or the risk of fire within our riparian streams is that big of an issue. We just do away with it, and then we just do WUI, and that's it. So we could also just not look into this sophisticated chisel if we feel it's complicating development too much, because that's the risk. I think with landscaping, I said this, the burden of regulation is to do it right. There has to be a lot of it. If you're gonna have regulation, it will often be robust to have it be sophisticated enough to address all these nuances. So I'd rather have a really big tool or no tool at all. Often having a small tool for something that is complicated, you're just creating conflict where I've said the rubber's hitting the road poorly for us. Of saying, sorry, you can't build. And they're like, but all these reasonable reasons we should be able to. I'm like, sorry, the tool says you can't. I'd just rather not do it or do it right, as kind of my approach to regulations in that way. So there's 3 options on the table: WUI, nothing, or this kind of dual 1-2 punch option. So if I get some kind of feedback of yes, continue to work on it, or, you know, maybe we do need some discussion whether it's even necessary, that's totally reasonable, because this is just the thought process.
I mean, I think it's worth exploring, like, especially based on the fire history data and like, I don't know, climate projections and things like that. Because we don't want to be missing something that could potentially protect people's property in the future.
Yeah.
But I agree with everything you're saying about not wanting to like overcomplicate or overregulate or make it too expensive unnecessarily. But I feel like we don't know enough at this point to know if we need it or if we don't need it. So to me, it makes sense to continue doing this kind of like data gathering and exploration
It's helpful.
to be able to decide which tool or combination of tools makes the most sense.
Especially the history, like that gives us some good
I have a
direction.
really great suggestion, and mapping it will give a good visual representation. I think the one thing that unspoken here is rim to rim work of the fire fuels reductions efforts that are currently going on and will likely be ongoing in a certain sense, of the engagements we've had to basically reduce fire fuels within the riparian areas. If that is massively effective and ongoing and committed to, it could reduce the need for this. This is all coming with the idea of that being a variable we're out of control of. Because a lot of these locations, which is a problem with our fire fuels reduction system and the engagement we're doing right now, is the floodway, which happens to be where a lot of this vegetation is happening. The majority of it is owned by private property owners that we can't get access to, or they refuse us access to even clean it up on their behalf. Really big issue, and that's an education issue. I think broadly, if we were saying, hey, we want to come in and help, the biggest thing here is some of that is really heavy fuel trees, and removal of trees is not popular, even if it is imminently going to run down the creek and run into a bridge and fall down or die. That it's still a tree at that moment. So that's one of the biggest challenges we've had, where I say this is worth pursuing, because that variable, if that was hyper successful, I might say this is a little too much or unnecessary to the level that it's already being taken care of. But I think the history, that's a really great tool to bring to the table that can provide a warrant for us to advance or not. And then the commission to consider. I mean, really, at the end of the day, it's you guys who are going to be the big lift in this, whether it's worth it or not, and then we'll take it to council on more or less how the tool works. Obviously, they'll adopt it, but
I will say, in my time talking to a lot of community members recently, fire concerns in the riparian area were a major concern. And it is interesting to hear that there may be an education lapse with people not willing to take our help and allow Rim to Rim to do some of this fuels mitigation on their property and on their behalf. So it does make sense to me to pursue something like this because at the very least, if you're handed, some kind of documentation to say, hey, you do actually have a risk on your portion of your property. And especially if we're able to follow it up with, we are partnering with Rim to Rim to mitigate these risks. If you would like to allow us to, we can help you with this, but you need to be aware of it. And then if you're doing future development of that property, that development needs to be in line with the amount of risk you're willing to expose yourself to. Makes a lot of sense to me.
No, that's useful direction for us. Because we were discussing going from like, is it defensible space only? Is it defensible space and the structure sometimes, or is it always both? And I think that that side of things where we're looking at, okay, specifically, if you can mitigate the hazard you have on your property, that it would make you lower risk is helpful for us to try to target like what level or what kinds of provisions would be in a particular code. And we can also bring more information on where we think risk is based on past fires.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Forget about that discussion.
Okay.
Thank you guys.
Yeah. All right. So I think the follow-up to this will be probably a public hearing on the state code and then some additional research on whether or not city-specific code is appropriate for Moab. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Alexi. Thank you.
I'm gonna compliment out loud. Alexi's presentations are always the best.
Very absolutely.
Agreed.
Yeah, I've got slideshow MB for sure. All right. Yeah. So on that note, I don't have a slideshow, but I have gobs and gobs of material.
Go with your Google document.
Yeah, that's right. We're back to the docs. So if we're ready to move to the next item.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes. Moving on to next item on our agenda, 5.2, the land use code update discussion.
Okay, I'm gonna attempt to go light speed. And my hope in this, in which we were kind of already leaning this direction, is having this session maybe be a bit of a specific introductory to this topic, letting the commission think on it, engage with the community, and actually come back with some suggestions. So the overture of tonight is land use and standards, specifically how we're identifying land uses, and I've been using this word a lot, but the sophistication of the uses and how they're identified to better have better descriptions. Therefore, they're being distributed into districts appropriately. So we're having effective Euclidean zoning tactics, things placed where we believe they ought to be. And the counter to that, which I believe is happening in our community right now to a degree, is we have zones that have a particular purpose. For example, we have neighborhood commercial zone, C5. Yet there's nothing in that zone from a use perspective that's actually effectively, practically advancing the purpose of that. So for example, the intent was this is a zone meant to be for local commerce, local eating establishments, it's meant to be local servicing, neighborhood commercial, small, local oriented. When we've had applications come to us in the past to develop retail or eating establishment or a business for that matter, there's nothing in the code to a regulatory perspective that articulates that. So you're having what we do have right now is it basically just makes small tourist oriented things over there, which is a corridor. So it's not something we've objected to because we can't. And also it's like, this is what the market is calling for. But that's what I think my premise of tonight is we need to look deeper into our uses, and maybe not all uses. What's kind of bizarre is we have hyper specific uses in some contexts, and then either very vague uses or a lack of them at all represented in our code. So we have shoe repair shop is one. We have pig farm, coal refinery. We have a bunch of absurd uses in my opinion, but we don't have a family shelter use. We don't or civic type uses. We don't have a number of uses that we have not only one but multiple, and they're essential to our community. So this is where I'm calling on the commission of, this is the very first thing that I thought the commission, this is what a good work piece would be for you guys to consider, engage with your, I wouldn't say constituencies, but your realms of the community to see how we could be better mapping these things. So I'll share a bit of a storyline via Google Sheets. I tried to put this into a PowerPoint. It was just going to end up more of a nightmare. So give us. This is a really interesting document that has basically 5 years worth of we need to fix our code. So there's lots on here. This particular tab,
Running list.
yeah, if you can identify some of those. The terms and definitions within our code. So basically our definitions glossary. So that has obviously things that like alley aren't a use in particular, but it's good for us to know the context of what is defined and what isn't.
Yeah.
But then beyond that, we have permitted uses or considered zoning permitted uses. Again, flying through this, and this is where I want to kind of introduce it, give you guys some actual materials, and then chew on it a little bit. Things like we have secondhand stores. We do have I'm trying to think of things that are specific.
Guard residences.
Sure. We have, again, kind of again to the narrative, we have a lot of things that are specific, but then we just have service station. And that's encapsulating, what I can think of is maybe 5 major variable types of service stations, but they're just allowed in any zone that a service station is allowed, which may not make sense because again, Euclidean zoning, which is the traditional practice of separating uses by intensity, which is what we practice typically, versus the alternative to that is form-based code. It doesn't matter what you're doing as long as your building from the exterior looks the same. You can think about old world Europe as often in that context. Stuff goes in and out, you never know what it is. Euclidean zoning is much more like your building is actually catered to what your use often is, but it needs to be located in an appropriate area that you're not creating conflicts between uses, particularly those that are commercial and residential.
There's like bars, brew pubs, microbreweries, distilleries.
Yeah, which is one. So that got really specific. So before that ordinance, which is relatively recent, we didn't have bar. Bar was not a use. It didn't exist. So that was interesting.
We're not careful. It's not going to be a use anywhere in the county.
Amen. So those are the uses that we do have. We also have uses that are permitted but don't have any definition. Therefore, they're just floating as permitted use in the code, but there's no way for us to analyze or synthesize how they should be applied or what the constraints of those uses might be. And then as existing uses without definitions, that hasn't been populated in this tab. And then we also have uses that are just vacant in the code entirely. Some of them we do have in the community, so we've just kind of band-aided the way in which to give them entitlements or business licenses that even though they're not represented, at least in a specific way. Hair salons, for instance. How do we, it's one of those things that some of the most obvious things are kind of interesting in this way. Or at least that one doesn't have a definition, I should say. But then, yeah, this is where we start getting into the generation of code. You guys thinking about the things that we need, because if we're not profiling the things that we actually need in this community, it's not impossible because we work with people all the time that is currently the case, but it makes it much more difficult for them to progress through the community. So if there's things that we need and don't have represented, that's an immediate challenge for folks to advance. So next, this is a bit of a preview. I'm gonna switch my categories here into module 1 that our consultants produce, which again, we're not inadequate by any means. The tools that they had, they just weren't as responsive to what we needed. I'm thinking about too much. I really appreciate our consultants did, and we're using it as a backbone to what we've done. But to the content language, it just there's no way they could have been informed to how it could actually implement. So what they've produced from this is a way to break these down a little bit better and by use categories. So this is module 1 that was submitted to us. Within that, they've organized it in use categories: residential, public, civic use categories, which I'm really appreciative of having its own distinguished category, which it traditionally does everywhere. But that's, I think, for Moab, a really under identified and served community of business that needs to be fortified and represented in our zoning districts much better, or even have its own zoning district dedicated, in my opinion. Commercial uses, industrial, and then kind of open use categories that might include right now mix typologies, or in this one I had agricultural in my working document. I've actually pulled agriculture out as its own use category type. And that we are a traditionally rural community, I think it's not that much of an offset, so it does deserve its own category. But then I was actually going to kind of show into what the code might look like as we're starting to, like, say, for residential housing living is an example of a residential use type. So within that use type, we're going to probably be breaking them into primary and then also accessory use components. So a good majority, which is why the Google Doc is kind of hard to translate here, we're moving away from a narrative type code into much more of a figure and matrix type code. I might even fly through this really quick to show you. Basically, through figured pictures and matrices, it's very clean what is, what isn't, what the metrics are, and very easily amendable. Versus a narrative can get more challenging, which is the way our code's designed now. But residential type living, group living, and through these use categories, it really sets up a really nice platform for us to populate with things we do have, or the things we want to have that might fall into that we wouldn't normally think about, because we're just going to count what we see. Community service, daycare, it gets quite expansive. Educational facilities, government. So this is the public and community service realm. I'm going to, because my computer's going to die, fly up to a figure just to show you guys really quickly what I mean by figure. So we're going to hopefully be populating our code with a number of images like this to help represent what can be, a picture is worth 1,000 words, how development and form regulations would actually look. So when we're having citizens trying to access our code, this will be able to translate not only language barriers, but also jargon barriers. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing in case my computer dies. So we've kind of talked about our existing conditions. We've talked about the proposed framing and categorizations of uses. And then the third topic I was wanting to talk about tonight, which is something our consultants have limited ability to understand or do, is look into uses that we need to expand apart. Some of those topics might be like how we identify overnight accommodations. I've used this example in the past, and it's not particularly eloquent at this point in time, but there are communities that live in the snow. We'll put it that way. And the whole saying goes, those communities have 100 words for snow because there's all these different variable types. But why would people in Florida have such a variety of definitions of snow? For our community, overnight accommodations, outfitters, local and non-local oriented type businesses, right now we have one term, outfitter, in that instance. When we're talking about uses and how they're meant to be regulated and getting away from arbitrary regulations, is every use will essentially have an impact that should have a mitigation, hence the regulation. We shouldn't be regulating things just for the arbitrary sake of that use. We're going to put this fence on it. Every regulation we should have should be tied to a specific instance that use creates. An example I had is a small retail bike shop that happens to also do touring agencies is not the same as a large river outfitter company that has massive storage and site impacts. Yet our code doesn't distinguish any difference between those two. So what we're seeing is there's folks usually around the middle realm of that use. It's kind of appropriate, but then there are uses that are way impactful to the neighbors or the community that don't have to offset their impacts nearly to an equity standpoint. And then what is even more significant, which we're seeing left and right, is really small businesses or small typologies of a business that have way overly onerous regulations. But I'm not doing that. I'm not storing an acre's worth of yard and drainage issues. I'm a little bike shop. So that's my ask of the commission tonight, is looking at these three sections. I would really like us to, and we've got 4 minutes before 8 o'clock, but so I'd like a little bit of feedback here, but go into our break considering this, and then when we come back, I think we'll produce materials in the packet that are basically what we've shown to kind of re-jog your memory of here's what it is, here's what we're trying to plan to do, and then maybe here are some prompts, of some uses that we do want to focus on and break out in particular, like those I've mentioned. So I'll go ahead and pause there. I think that's enough of an introductory. And I'd love to get some feedback right now, what our thoughts are, or particular ideas that if you can mention them now, I will also during the break do research. If you're like, no, this is tremendously underrepresented, or hey, we have all these types of descriptions for this one thing that we don't even use anymore. We could probably get rid of that. So either one of those is very, very helpful. But maybe throw this to the body to discuss a little bit, get some feedback.
I think it's a really smart direction to take the uses code. I think it shows an intentional mindset in our planning. And it also makes it extremely clear when people are like, I want to start this business, it's in our code, the use is defined. I would also suggest that we somehow word in the code for a use we haven't thought of kind of section, that like we'd be open to discussion and potential code amendment, because we would like to define it and also figure out what section of town it would make most sense in as far as zoning. And so rather than have it just continue to be exceptions, I would love to see something in the code that's like, hey, if you have uses that we haven't thought of, that you're to start a business.
You're right in line. And I think like right now our code is, if this list is not explicitly permitted in the zone, it is prohibited. So it is or isn't. So in this new draft, we identify if a use is not listed, but it is within this scope of interpretation, we can apply it and say, yes, that qualifies as this thing. So we can legally band-aid in that way. And then it also has a section of if it can't be interpreted, or we choose that it does really truly not have a use, it has an option for that. So that was something the consultants through this system were already starting to contemplate a little bit. And that's the type of code I think throughout we're trying to develop, which is we know, and as you were speaking about that, I was thinking a lot of our code, and no offense to those of the past that have been trying to build it up, a lot of it is kind of copy paste from other communities. So no wonder we had this use that we don't even use. It was copy pasted from this other community. So now we're kind of maturing as a community. We're like, no, we're really ready to take the reins of what's happening here. So not only with our uses, but how we approach the dynamic of that. I think we're definitely getting ready to that. And that'll be represented in, I think, all aspects, whether it's regulations, something comes up. We're seeing that with our exceptions and exemptions type system is we know we haven't thought of anything. So rather than just telling you no, we're giving avenues. So that'll be something, if we're missing it in the code and you guys notice, hey, there's really not a parachute on this for this person if something doesn't work. That's something we need to be aware of. And maybe we are intentional in very few instances where we're like, nope, this is the line, period. But most of the time it's yes, if. It should always, the answer should never be no, it should be yes, if. Yes, you can do this if we go and do these other things. That's at least the way we'd like to approach it.
I think it's useful, and y'all might already have done this, but I know it's a little onerous, but the list of our existing business licenses, go through it, make sure everything fits in a category that we have on the books at the end of the day. I feel like that's maybe a fun task for somebody with glass of wine some night or something, but make sure that we're at least capturing what exists today, that everything that we currently have a business license for has
fits
Category.
into one of the categories that we're gonna end up with this proposal.
You guys are coming
Yeah.
up with some fun projects.
The descriptions of what a business is doing on their license often changes dramatically.
Well, and by history, it might say retail, and that was from when they started the business in
Mhm.
1980. And now they're retail with a coffee shop with a so it evolves.
Yeah.
And also the business licenses back in the day are massively um, unhelpful as
Yes.
far as scope.
Yeah.
So we've been
But at least
recently
the
like,
name
the
of
new
this you're
one- the new
capturing,
people-
like,
Oh,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
you'll read like
yeah,
something, you know,
we
you'll
could
read,
probably assess. Oh, this is what that.
yeah,
we know,
you'll
we
see,
know what that
you'll
is.
see like bike fiend and be like, okay,
Yeah.
here's what bike fiend does. Let's make sure they fit into one of these categories.
Yes.
Which category
Mhm.
is appropriate? I think
Yeah.
that's a good example because they are a bike shop, an outfitter, a
Mhm.
coffee shop.
Uh-huh.
How many hair salons do we have?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many.
I was thinking also, and I'm sure this is part of your spreadsheet already, Corey, but like peer communities, other gateway towns, other
Mhm.
tourism towns, maybe Colorado mountain towns, like
Mhm.
coming through their use categories that might be more similar to our context and
Mhm.
seeing if there's anything we're missing.
I think that's a great suggestion as well. So we haven't not explored those, but we haven't actually created a catalog of those. So it's kind of been more like inquiry level stuff. So I think creating catalog is actually a really good.
Well, I think
Good
particularly
research
those
approach.
towns that have, you know, you keep coming back to the outfitter definition for
Mhm.
good reason, but
Mhm.
those towns that are likely to have multiple categories across
Mhm.
different recreational activities and at different scales, because
Mhm.
like you're absolutely right, like sort of a sole proprietor who's, you know,
Mhm.
renting the occasional canoe and maybe
Mhm.
taking people on a hike is very different from like a major UTV rental place.
That's exactly
Mhm.
right.
Is different from
Right.
a major canoe rental place like Texas, you know,
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
different from Wild West, who has a bajillion boats in a huge yard, you know, not in the city,
Mhm.
but all sorts of.
Yeah.
So
Certainly.
when you're building these uses, can you also do it within, like, so if you do outfitter that is rents canoes that, and then a size, can you segregate them?
I mean, you could have like outfitter one, outfitter two.
That's kind of, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the essence where I think we'd like to go, and it's.
Mhm.
I'm kind of pushing this out to you. Outfitter for me was kind of one of the most obvious.
Yeah.
Where it's like it's just so clear that from the folks we have, that it should be broken out in that way, where you could be, you are a canoe outfitter, but there's different scales and scopes of that. And so I think you could break into kind of what we saw with residential, commercial, public is within that sub use of outfitter. Maybe that is the umbrella use, but then we have, motor recreation outfitters. And then within that, there's different
Water.
classes and scales, fleet sizes, put you into different categories.
Yeah.
Again, and this is kind of what we were saying with Lexi, to do things right, it's a lot of words. You end up creating a lot of code to fortify and do things right. And the way we've talked about with the building department is the term we kind of use upstairs is where like the more we try to look at something, we're dividing mercury over and over. So right now you can do outfitters or you can't. It's one ball of mercury. It's one conflict point, if you will. But we say, oh, now there's 3 types of outfitters. Now somebody's going to be just on that side of not being able to do it. Like, well, what about us? And so we'll divide mercury further. So we keep dividing mercury until there's basically an account for almost everybody, but there's still going to be conflict at some point. So that's the balance that the commission I will task you with is how specific is too specific? How boiled down do we get before we're like, this is broken down enough. You're
Well-
going to be. We've said this kind of the way, like tax brackets. It'd be nice if your particular income situation was that is your percentage, but you're going to be into brackets where somebody's going to be on the short end of the stick, somebody's going to be on the nice end of the stick. So how narrow do we make those
When having
brackets?
wording saying, that doesn't mean no, that just means we haven't thought of it yet.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, another example that comes to mind from like our conversations the past couple of years was that one person who came to talk about having like a parking lot for people who live in their vans,
Mhm.
you know, and whether that would fall in the same, I don't know what the current category is, if there's like RV park or if that's also
Mhm.
something else, but yeah, could you lump that with RV park or does that need to
Mhm.
be?
That's a really good example of like I said OAs. That's a really good example. OAs doesn't really distinguish for that nuance of, especially as we're getting more technically advanced and people are getting more creative, which is what I'd say with Moab. Nobody's coming in to build a bookstore anymore. They're
Mhm.
coming in to build a bookstore that does yoga, that also has a juice bar, and
Mhm.
which is good. It's good for the economy of Moab to have that diversification. But what that's doing to us is like that we don't have words to support them, so we're having to be really creative in our approach. So giving us a little bit more something, I think, like Shelly said, is like it's there, then it's easy for them to go. But again, we can't and that's what I think your point. We can't contemplate for any given situation, but enough language that says, "Oh, we haven't contemplated that, but here's your path," based on where you may be within a particular category.
Yeah, that way it's not like making your guys' jobs so exasperating.
Mm-hmm.
Clear
That's all
pathways.
this is. We're just selfish at the end of the day. We just want to have our jobs be easier.
Corey, did you say
I
you're gonna-
need it to be.
So you're telling- you guys are we're making your jobs harder now.
Yes, that's really a good way to look at it. This
There's
is
help
be
there.
hard that
Absolutely.
it's plug and play.
Efficiencies.
The levels of interpretation and administrative changeover creating disruptions, that shouldn't be the case. The code should stand enough on its own.
Well, I think that this has been a long time coming. These. So maybe it will take a little longer, but if we really do it intentionally and get it the best that we can, because how long has it been since it's been done prior to so that it lasts for years,
Mhm.
so that you're just not, like you said, always making these exceptions, always
Mhm.
making these exceptions. So I think if we do harder work in the long run, it'll be
Mhm.
easier. So
Mhm.
that's how I feel about it. It's-
Like it. So you're gonna
Thanks
give
for
us a
letting me
copy of your spreadsheet or homework?
I will, and yeah. So I think presentation wise, it didn't transform well, but I think
Email it to me.
in a packet we'll get you the spreadsheets. Basically,
No worries.
yeah, the what is and what isn't. I think that
Reading before bed.
yeah, no kidding. You'll put you right to bed. But yeah, that's what we were kind of contemplating before this. Is we didn't have time to really fortify that for the packet tonight, so let's just introduce it. We ended up taking quite a bit of time anyway, but it's a big topic, and as I'm looking through the code, a lot of the remainder of it is either the attorneys are doing it, Johanna and I are working out policy regulation structures of it. This is going to be, I think, your guys' first biggest bite of the apple. The second, which will be the second chapter or second half of this section, will be what regulations we attach to these things. So use regulations. So first establish what all the uses are, and then we say, what do we need these guys to be doing based on maybe the scales that they have to offset the impacts that they might have.
Yeah, it's going to be really tricky to separate those conversations. So I'll be taking a lot of notes for whatever comes up in our conversation about what uses and their definitions. Whenever something comes up about the use parameters, although those are going to be separate conversations, we'll be sure to capture all your ideas.
That's something we discussed. The last thing I'll say, discussing the code today, I was gonna, maybe we could pull up the code, maybe we don't need to, was the whole use parameter attached to the use. So the way our code's currently
That's
structured, if you were to go look at any given zone, here's the list of uses, and again, narrative format, not matrix. Here's the list of uses permitted in this zone. And then indents, here's, if you want a daycare, here's all the things you have to do to a daycare, use parameter elements of that use. Or the use regulations, or what Johanna kind of plans, like, these are the permitted uses, and here are the conditions that you have to satisfy to do that use. This code proposal, and we don't know how we feel about it yet. At least the way the consultants organize this, which I don't necessarily disagree with right off the bat, is basically saying we're going to list all the uses and define them, and then we're going to put what you need to do with them in a totally different section of the code, so they're not married. That's a bit of a user quandary of, when we look at the code, you'll have in this zone, this is the use that's permitted, and in this zone you have to do these things with this use. Where we've seen that is like professional offices. In the C4 professional offices, you have to do X, Y, and Z. In a different zone, professional offices, you have to do A, B, and C. So when they're organized that way, it's a little bit more clear to the user this zone has a specific type of professional office and this one has a different one. What we'd be doing in the code organization, which I think will have a psychological impact, is it's permitted, and then you have to go track to a different section of which zone I'm in, which regulations will apply.
Yeah.
Just kind of reverse engineering. So I think that's what we have to think through of how will the user, I don't know how to say that, the user process would be.
Yeah, practically,
Yeah.
making this into a PDF and sending this page, permitted uses, is what people call probably most frequently
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Give me the permitted uses.
Yeah.
And I send them this
I have a
PDF.
property of interest in this zone. What can I do? Here you go. This would take some, here's what's permitted in this matrix, and then follow this little asterisk to this section of the code to see what you have to do under that use.
Yeah, the county's code currently does that. So if you're interested in an example, you can go take a look at the county code and try to navigate that.
And that's, I think, as you zoom out, the way the consultants have it structured is where I'm like, I don't disagree with that, because it's organized on a much more, I think, regulatory oriented experience for us.
It'd be easier for us.
And that's why I don't know.
I don't
It
know.
could be.
I don't know.
Versus like a user where it's narrative based. I think there's some merits to have something in the narrative organization versus matrix with associated offshoots within the code.
Well, some sort of hybrid could work too, right? Like maybe the uses and then a table with the,
That was, yes, I'm right there with you. Me personally, it's kind of, if you've ever used a matrix from kind of an XY axis, you're getting the information in the middle, but you have to know what your X and Y searches are. I know which zone I am, or I know what use I want. And then you can kind of find information. But what if you don't know those variables? That's where the narrative is helpful. You're open shopping, because we've had people say, hey, I want to do a restaurant. Which zones could I do it in? Well, that's one type of matrix. But if you're like, oh, I'm in this zone, how do I say it? Somebody knows they want to do a restaurant. They don't know what zones they're in. Or they know what zone they're in. What of any of the uses can I shop from? That's a totally different matrix. So having one matrix to capture everything gets you in a bit of a weird search mechanism, whereas narrative at all is just, it's just there. So I've been grappling with that with the consultants. I kind of want to both, because from a regulatory standpoint, the matrix is really clean and nice. But from a user standpoint, and maybe it's converse, it works both ways.
Was there a way to create like a filter system where it's like, I want to filter by zone, or I want to filter by.
Whoa,
In their
computer.
Maybe, yeah, maybe.
They're like all shopping.
Yeah.
That was what I was going to bring up.
The interactive
Sounds
nature of something
cool.
like that, because if it's not accessible now, like certainly it's not on our website, through AI and the improvements to technology, it should be.
Yeah.
Like if right now you're saying, hey, AI, ChatGPT, what uses or which zones are permit restaurants or eating establishments?
In Moab City.
It'll. So if we had something implemented just in the code like that, that would be really handy. That's something that we're searching about.
Yeah.
I think that's our software program, less of a code organization, more of a software issue. That's
I think,
thought.
yeah, I think in general, well, I understand the case for narratives. I think if the narratives are poorly written or in any way confusing, they cause tons of problems. Whereas a matrix or something like that is really cut and dry, and people can learn to use a matrix, but a poorly written narrative is always going to be a stumbling block. So matrices with some kind of searchability so that you can kind of cut through learning how to connect the squares and instead just search like, I'm an R2 and I want to, like how many housing units can I have on my property of this size? If you had something that could filter through it, you wouldn't need a narrative.
Yep. And I think that you've nailed it. I mean, heard and agree. That is it. Which is how we're gonna, I think, grappling how to approach it. But that you've nailed it.
Okay, we are exactly at half an hour. If we want to observe that.
Fine by me, whatever you guys want. This was a big one. So I think this was a appropriate amount of introduction that give us some time to think, come back in January. We do have a future agenda item
Yeah.
consideration if we want to be done with, we're done with land use code for the moment?
Yes, let's move on to,
Sign it.
well, we have
One
one
item.
more thing before we move on to that. We have 5.3, which is our 2026 planning commission.
Which
Yeah.
was the item? Sorry, yep, that's the one.
Yes, I have
No surprises.
a suggested amendment,
Okay.
to help facilitate Amasa's expedient process.
Okay.
January 22nd,
Mhm.
we have a regularly scheduled meeting on there. I would like to propose that that be moved to the 29th. If
Okay.
we, yeah, if we do not change our regularly scheduled meeting, I will likely be coming to you to schedule a special meeting.
Got it.
So thought might as well just,
That's because it won't be ready by the 22nd, but we would like it before our first meeting in February.
We have to wait for the city council meeting, but because the month is offset with the first Thursday,
One of those.
we need the DA done before we can act, but
Okay.
our meeting was before the
Mm.
DA.
So
So
not doing the
That's
22nd?
fine to me.
that's what
that's
we're
my
proposing.
suggestion.
Yeah,
The 29th as of right now works fine for me.
Same.
Mm,
Massive
Yeah.
audit that day. But I heard-
We don't need your schedule, Miles. Just.
Yeah.
I should be done. I have a massive state audit that day.
okay,
Best of luck.
Not looking forward to it.
yeah, I think,
I should be here. If I'm not,
I think I'm out of town on the 8th.
really need to pray for me.
Yeah, we'll send you a gift basket.
on the 8th of February.
Of
January.
January.
Oh.
Oh.
And that's
We'll be
where,
here.
so the 8th, and again, that's the
I am out
first
of town.
meeting is typically canceled because we're having our strategic planning sessions.
Okay.
So we, as council and planning commission, we typically skip the first meeting.
Okay, good, because I'm gonna be out of town.
Yeah.
I
Carolyn,
think-
would the 29th be available? for
I
you?
think I should be.
All right.
available. I see a conflict, we ran into this last year, but May 28th is graduation at high school.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
So I will not be here. Just
I'm
a heads up,
impressed that
but
you know that off. the-
Yeah, wow.
well, because it's always, I know. So it's just one of those days like,
Mm.
I can just tell you I won't be
Me either. Arthur's really advanced.
here. He's,
Graduating.
he is.
Be graduating high
It's not
school
the baby.
May of next year.
Yeah, yeah. So just saying. So, I just know I won't be here that day. Nor will I be here for either of the marches.
Better.
But I'll
find a new
email that.
Miles that.
Mhm.
But
And we can cross those bridges, but like,
Yeah.
like just keep that, flag that a few months in advance.
yeah, I'll let you guys know.
I might be getting married like right around April 23rd. So
Oh,
I'm like,
Nice.
you don't want to get married here in Chambers during the. You could probably rope in the mayor.
but
No.
I really don't.
That's
Those lighting's so-
Yeah, and I have a sabbatical in the summer too, so we'll figure all that.
We'll
stuff out.
figure that out.
Yeah, but
Yeah, it's very flexible.
Mhm.
You know, more or less it's the general outline, but we figured with this at least
Mhm.
very first immediate, and I was like, might as well not do a special meeting, just make it a regular meeting.
Yeah, let's do that.
Um,
Okay,
I vote for that.
yeah, I think that
Let's do
seems
it.
like
The 29th.
29th instead of the 22nd.
Correct.
I like
And so that would require an amendment with the action to approve.
I move that we amend our regular meeting schedule for 2026 to include a regular meeting on January 29th and cancel the otherwise scheduled regular meeting for January 22nd.
I second it.
Second from Shirley. Any discussion? All in favor of that change, please say aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Perfect. So we'll,
We have a Miles.
amended and posted.
Yeah. I mean, you're still on the planning
It's
commission.
not as important for me, but yes.
Right now,
aye.
you're still one of us for another 5 minutes, man. All right.
It's bedtime.
All right, regular meeting schedule amended, and approved for 2026. Next, future agenda items.
we have, annexation.
Okay.
coming through, first January meeting, we have the update for the WUI. We have a possible planning commission appointment if we get anybody. And
The planning commission.
code
Mhm.
updates. And I don't have anything else for the first January meeting.
Great.
Yeah.
Cool.
Did you get my email by the
I
way?
did, sorry. I
Okay.
will reply.
No worries. Thank you. Alrighty. Covers it for us.
All right. That said, I will adjourn this final meeting of 2025 at 8:21 p.m. Miles,
Goodbye forever.
thank you. Good luck.
Make good choices.
You've been a wonderful addition
Make
to the
us
planning
proud.
commission, and we're really, really excited, every single person, for you
Yep.
to represent us on city council and to carry the God gospel of